This is Amy with Creative Catapult Coaching,
And Megan with Focus Like a Mother.
and this is episode 11. I think we just counted again, but we are talking about Zoom calls or really any video calls as neurodivergence and kind of what we do, what we like, what we don't like, and sort of how we came to these realizations or something like that.
Yeah, sounds good. For me, it actually came up on Friday. We had a video call with a clinician for something who works in the neurodivergent space. Um, and she and I were reminiscing of our video calls because now we do in-person services for a lot of things. But we had a video call this past week and we were reminiscing like 2021, 2022-ish era video calls of when they couldn't do clinical things in person because they do a lot of in-home services. And it was just like the pros and cons of video calls as a neurodivergent person. Um, and one of mine is that I can see myself. So I usually have it set up to where I can see my camera view as well as seeing the person or the group that I'm talking to. So for like class calls or group calls or whatever, I can usually see multiple people or at least the
Uh-huh.
speaker and me. But the big thing is that I can see myself so that I don't have the background, I'll use computer terms, the background script running in my head of like, don't forget to make eye contact, don't forget to smile, don't do weird things, don't wave your hands, or what do I do with my hands? Um,
That's funny. I've
no,
so given up. I don't think I've ever had that script run, and I probably should.
it's
Um,
it may come with the like the social anxiety stuff, but it's just interesting because for me, video calls are very different than like in-person meetings, just in terms of the amount of mental capacity and like background information running of like trying to filter out all the things.
Interesting. Do you find it easier on video calls then?
I think I like video calls better for a lot of things, but then there are things that are lost. So while it filters out some of the background distractions versus like meeting in a coffee shop or meeting somewhere else, and it also filters out some of the internal distractions of like what my face is doing or whatever. But you also lose some of the context of the other person's body language or um, other things going on that can't easily come across in the video. So I think it's situation specific, but a lot of times, especially for things where I have to do deep listening, like coaching calls,
Uh-huh.
uh, the video provides some advantages and some disadvantages. But I'm able to focus a whole lot better in a video call because I can control my surroundings, my space, and some of my internal dialogue and processes a little bit better than out in the wild.
That's interesting. Yeah, I too have used video calls for so long at this point, even before the pandemic was a thing. And before that, I actually used phone calls for coaching. And so I often have found that phone in many ways is more conducive to coaching than people think it would be because I will often, and I don't know how much of this is a neurodivergent thing as I just do it, closing my eyes and listening. And I've gotten so used to listening to pacing and intonation on the phone that I often do better when I take out the visual stimuli. So for
Mm.
me, I will often find that, either video off or even I'll just close my eyes on a call, pretty much like this for the world. If you ever work with me, you may see me do this. Anyway, that being said, also knowing that, what I like too about video calls is that, like you, I can be in a much quieter space and be in a much greater control of my environment. I also like the bit where I can actually see the background. I know that we've had this conversation with filters and various people. For some reason, I am really not a fan of other people using like the complete blur out the background. I totally understand why people do it, and mine is using portrait lighting or mode right now, so it slightly softens background, but it doesn't make it go away. But when people use a lot of the filtering, their head changes shape and their hair changes shape, and that's super weird and distracting in my brain and my world. And then the hands
My head
disappear,
sideways.
and it's not doing it quite as dramatically today. But and I imagine over time the AI will get better with filtering stuff like that. Um, but for me, the ability to kind of control, and I oddly too like watching myself on video, and I suppose like you, it's kind of that monitoring, what am I doing? But I also find that I'm often surprised by things that I value or am not bothered by. Other people just are like, no go. I have no issue having my camera on. I've learned that a lot of people, some of it for different contexts, not just social, but also a lot of it's not just social anxiety, but a lot of it cultural context and even self-identity and expectations from all sorts of other perspectives. There are reasons people don't want to be on camera. That's fine. And really, no, it's fine. But what has been interesting is I've learned over time is I've been gung-ho to try and get people to body double virtually, especially who work from home. And some of my clients and some of the people I've suggested it to have not been enthused, and that's fine. But realizing as I've been through several conversations that some people actually have a certain level of social anxiety or discomfort over, meeting somebody in a visual space online. And I'm like, oh, it's
Yeah, so the body doubling one, I think we touched on it in our body doubling episode, is I'm one of those that there are some instances where you and I have talked about body doubling, and I'm like, yeah, I can't have another person in my space or feel like I'm being watched or whatever for certain tasks, but there are other things that like it might work really well. But yeah, and even trying to think of different situations. So I've done coaching in person, face to face, same with other meetings. And I've done coaching on video calls. I have done a few where it's like a poor connection or something, so don't do video. And for learning purposes and self-development purposes as a coach, I will often listen to, if we recorded a session, I will often listen to the audio only because I can pick up better on, like you were mentioning, some of the patterns, some of the pace and the intonation, and some things that I might not have picked up on in the moment. And I can also hear some of my own patterns and some of my own questions and listen to them again without the video to just see what I pick up and what I might have approached in a different way. So just my own self-development. But there is also, you and I have talked about like listening to our own podcasts and watching them. So I watched some of them this weekend.
painful to
By the
listen to
way,
my own
anybody
voice.
who's watched them, I'm sorry, my hair, I looked like a hot mess in episode 4. I am not sure what was going on. If you're just joining us, enjoy the hilarity that is whatever
And
this
I
was.
have absolutely zero recollection of what she's talking about. But again, I have one episode where I thought my hair looked really cute. I just had to cut it, and the curls were kind of falling out after I'd slept on it for a day or two. And I thought, oh, it's fine. And then I looked back at it and went, oh God, what was I doing? But I
But that's
suppose
another
that kind of
thing that
experience.
comes up on like video calls. Getting ready for a video call to my brain is very different than getting ready to go somewhere. I probably need to change that in my brain. Um, but like I prefer my hair up, as you can usually tell, out of the way. But I have all the little postpartum wispies. So a lot of times I'm trying
I
on
don't think
video
that was
calls, they're
ever
like
just
super,
postpartum. I had that, and I don't have children to blame it on.
it's a hormones thing. So it's not necessarily postpartum, but it's a
I just assumed it was hairs growing out at different rates because, hairs only last about 2 years or whatnot, and then they recycle themselves. But
Yeah, so
whatever.
side fact, when you're pregnant, you stop or slow down shedding your hairs. And then after you give birth, a lot of women experience heavy postpartum hair loss. And then your hair starts growing in new hairs to replace it. And so you end up with an excessive amount of those little wispy things. But they drive me bonkers on video calls. So I like to be able to see my the video of myself, but I have it like teeny tiny on my screen so that I can just see like my body language and stuff. So I can't actually see what I would look like full size on the screen. So I watched some of them and was like, whoa, okay. Um, but the background thing, I don't mind when other people have virtual backgrounds, but I generally prefer a real background or to blur it because it's not quite as distracting to me. So that's on my side for like what I put up for myself. But like there have been calls on in my consulting business, my consulting work, where it just depends on what the other people I'm working with want to do. So sometimes people always want the video on because they want to be able to make that connection. And some people, like you said, just don't want the video on for many different reasons, but it's just interesting thinking about it from a neurodivergent perspective and from the empathetic view perspective of what is the impact for other people versus just what you're going into the video call with. So that's just interesting to me. There she goes. Bye.
Sometimes body language needs to be hidden.
But well, and since you had your picture up there just for a second, so you turned your video off. It's also like, so Amy's
And
got
I
her
don't know
video
if
off
anyone
now.
else can see it now.
So if anybody's just listening, Amy turned off her video and I still have mine on. So to do a video call, sometimes it's funny because sometimes we forget what we're doing or forget that there's a camera there, especially if the other person's video is off. So it's just, I don't know, everybody's different experiences and preferences on calls is different. And then some people will cite like etiquette. So in the corporate world, there are a lot of like unwritten rules around video calls, or written, that as a neurodivergent person, sometimes the written rules I can follow. The unwritten rules, trying to figure out like what somebody else's expectation is. Like, please just tell me what your expectation is with a video call. Is video on, video off? Should I be muted all the time unless I'm ready to speak? Like, tell me what the rules are.
Yeah. Yeah. There was somewhere else I was going with that, but I think it's weird that, you know, people aren't okay with just saying, hey, can we turn it on or off? And I realize a lot of that's got to do with hierarchy and some other stuff, but there's been a lot of spaces where I've grown up having to advocate for myself around allergies. So in a lot of spaces, I don't even think about it, saying, either tell me what's going on or I'm going to do this. And if you need it differently, let me know. But I
Mm-hmm.
also realize that that's not something everybody always has the privilege or the practice to do.
Yeah, it's interesting with my corporate background that some of you mentioned privilege, having autonomy over how you approach virtual meetings, whether they're phone calls, video calls, video calls without the video on, et cetera, is a little bit of, in some cases, it's a privilege to have that autonomy because there are rules depending on your work setup or who you're meeting with. There are some spaces where they want you to have your video on for different reasons. But it's just interesting, all of the different, that's why I said empathy.
Yeah.
Because giving someone the autonomy of how they're approaching a video call, or like meeting in their own space. So doing a video call versus meeting in person. I don't like a lot of things in my background. I haven't hung anything up on my wall in my background here in my office yet. Um, but yeah, I can sit in my own space. Like I know that I'll be comfortable. I can control the temperature, all of that kind of stuff. Some of those things, um, I want to say matter a lot more, but are just more important, from a neurodivergent standpoint, because as you mentioned, it's all the external stimuli. Um, and being able to focus on a meeting or a call, at least to me, is my top priority, especially when I'm coaching or working with consulting clients, is being able to direct all of my capacity to listening and connecting and processing all of the information. But if I'm distracted by, you know, the chaos behind me or other stuff that I can see or whatever, or sounds or temperature or the list of good reference sensory podcast episode. Um,
Have we done that one yet?
we have, it is, as of today, it's, I think it's the one right before this one. So I think it's episode 10.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and for me, again, I also know that one thing that a lot of people liked about video and, for neurodivergent, the video stuff often lets us take calls wherever. We don't have to make it to an appointment or specific location on time. But there were so many jokes and memes about, we look presentable from the waist up, or, straight behind us is, looks decent, and it's shambles to the sides, because again, we've got some control over the narrative that we presented. There is some truth to it, but
yeah, the meme I'm
also
thinking of is sitting in a beach chair with a green screen taped to your back, to
oh,
the
I
back of
didn't
the
see
chair,
that one.
and the whole beach all around you. It's like there are there are pros and cons. So it depends. That's why I said it's situation. For me, it's situation dependent. But I like
Do you have any of them that we could flash up on the screen?
the what? Oh,
The
I don't have
meme.
any like the memes pulled up. No.
Yeah, I mean, not that
Um,
I do
I did
either.
not pull any of them up, but that was one of the things of I don't feel that guilt anymore on video calls of being wherever I am. So, you know this, a lot of times I'll take a call from my porch because I like to sit outside if it's not too really hot. Um, because it's peaceful and it's quiet and it's, relatively private. And I can be comfortable and focus. But I don't feel that guilt anymore, but when I worked in the corporate world, or if I work with corporate clients, I will always have kind of that inner voice in the background, um, because I lived corporate life so long and had been, kind of conditioned of you have to be in a certain space doing a certain thing kind of thing, that even on a video call, I feel like I have to be in a certain space. Um, and that just kind of it's not I maybe it is a neurodivergent thing, but there are unwritten rules that my brain has now programmed that if I work in certain spaces or certain situations, I have to do certain things and be a certain way for video calls.
Yeah, well, and it could be too that as part of the coaching culture, especially the space that I've been in, that, a lot of us do work from home offices. So there's, it can be much more casual, but there's I think still a certain set of rules where it would be very odd to people if I were to show up doing this in a busy restaurant or a coffee shop.
Mhm.
I mean, I know that I would actually, and I've done a couple coaching body doubling sessions with people while they are in a cafe or a restaurant, but they can hear and they're not doing things that are hugely confidential feeling. As long
Mhm.
as somebody can still hear and generally speak and be comfortable, I've gotten to a point where I'm okay with whatever environment the client is in. I've had a couple conversations with people that the cafeteria at lunch is not really conducive to the kind of work we're doing, and would they please consider taking the next call elsewhere.
Mm,
I mean, for a 30-minute call, for a 15-minute check-in, did you get the stuff turned in? I understand that, yeah, there are times where that may be reasonable, but for the most part, I still find the criteria of, are you in a place that supports you being able to fully pay attention is important.
hmm. Well, it's interesting because you mentioned confidentiality. So a lot of times I don't have them in my office right now because they're down. I was working downstairs. I have a headset with like in-ear headphones that I use a lot of times with the computer. So if I'm in a space like right now, I am in my office by myself, my home office. Um, so I just have my mic and the computer and everything. But if I'm pretty much anywhere else, I'll have a headset on where I'm the only one that can hear um, what someone is saying to me. But I'll generally take coaching calls from like here in my office where I'm closed in by myself if I'm the client. So there are a lot of times that I will receive coaching from someone else, or I am the client of some other service. That's when I'm okay with, oh, I'll sit somewhere else, or I'll sit, out on my porch. It's still private. And a lot of times I'll still have my headset in just so that like I can hear better. But I think that's one of the things that for me with video calls, a lot of times I'll wear a headset so that I can hear better. Um, that's one of the distractions we didn't talk about. We talked about visual distractions. There
Yeah,
are a lot of times
I was
sound
gonna say we should
distractions
circle
too.
back before we wrap up on to some of the other distractions, because we both have spent a fair amount of time today adjusting lights and where we're looking with cameras and talking about, when are we distracted by our background or somebody else's background. I was quite amused at your point of hyper focus. I don't, know how much you want to share about that, but that you were distracted by somebody else's background because of the way they had it set up. And at what point did that become a problem or not was an
Yeah,
interesting point
yeah.
for us to discuss.
Well, and we're at 22 minutes, so we can kind of wrap up. But sound is the other one. Is there's always the classic, can you hear me? I think you and I start like every call that way. Can you hear me okay?
It's like, do
Um,
we have, yeah, and I think at the old Verizon commercials, can you hear me? Can you hear me
can you hear me
now?
now?
And ours isn't so much now for connection, but do we have all the mics turned on, the appropriate programs in
Or
control
can
of
you
sound?
hear like the lawnmower going outside, or on my side, a child screaming or crying or yelling at their sibling in the background? Or if I am sitting outside and you're coaching me, a lot of times I'll be like, can you hear the marching band down at the high
I'm like,
school?
no,
And for the
no,
most part,
really
it's
can't.
no. But I just had someone call me about something this morning and was like, sorry if the wind is in the background. I'm like, all I hear is you. So for the most part, noise canceling and isolation on today's mics is pretty good. But there are sometimes distractions or distractions with connection, like the digitization of the sound or the video if the internet signal's poor or whatever. But I think for the most part, I don't know how much it has to do with neurodivergence or just our own personal quirks, but I wonder what other people's feelings are about video calls and sound and like audio visual preferences.
Yeah, it's funny. I know a lot of people at this point absolutely hate video calls. I don't mind them. Um, and I am on video a lot of most days. I remember people going, if I ever attend another online video meeting, I'm gonna just hug the computer out the window or some equivalent thereof.
Yeah,
But I
it's
suppose part of it is, when I'm done, I can go and grab my coffee or I can go outside and take a walk. I don't have to go anywhere or do anything. I think I may get more restless at in-person meetings, but it could also be that a lot of those weren't things I was interested in, usually in being in a meeting for, whereas now most of mine are relevant and interesting.
Yep. And a lot of what we talked about here, maybe another topic is group calls versus group in-person meetings. which has some other dynamics and other just lots of information processing versus a lot of the examples I was giving were pretty much one-to-one type things.
No, good call on the distinction, but yeah, I don't think we had any real advice or any particular thoughts other than we were just amused at our own recollections and what we were distracted by or not in calls.
And I think there is some value in advocating for yourself in a polite, respectful manner. So like when I've been coaching you before, you've asked me to not blur my background if I can. So a lot of times I guess I'm pretty much always sitting here. So there's nothing behind me, so it's not a big deal. There have been a couple times that I've sat at a desk elsewhere, quietly in my house or whatever. But yeah, it's just same as the distraction that was bothering me. I have a regular call with that person. So if it's still distracting, then I can always say, hey, did you know that I can see X, Y, or Z? And it's driving me bonkers. But yeah, and I guess just finding for us, it was finding the lighting that was going to work for us today.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think it's interesting because other times when I have asked for something, it makes somebody else uncomfortable. And so they choose not to do it. And I'm usually fine with that. It's just, it goes two ways, just because I ask for an accommodation doesn't mean somebody else has to meet it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time they're minor adjustments. That's a whole other conversation is, at what point whose accommodations win
Mm-hmm.
and why. And I think that's so much of just human negotiation, and we could go off on that for a very long time.
We could. I think for this one, we've talked ourselves in circles a couple
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, we're
So
probably out of general topics.
the last awkward video call thing is that for some reason I still feel like I have to wave goodbye a lot of times, and I'm trying to catch myself. So with that,
But I think maybe that's part of the culture that is emerging around video calls is that, we wave, and maybe that's just in the spaces that I do, but I will say, and there's a certain intonation that I use and other people use on video calls when we're saying goodbye that's different than I use on the phone. And it's just kind of odd to notice.
mhm, yeah.
It's developing its own culture in and of itself.
And I didn't even mention the whole this is a neurodivergent thing, having to set it up the same way every time. So like I always have it set up the same way on my screen, depending on which camera I'm using. As I'm
That's
pointing.
not as much of a thing.
Yeah, I have to have
Again, we
stuff
all
the
have
same.
our own quirks.
So, well, with that, we are at almost a half an hour. This might be our longest episode. Sorry, guys.
And again, far more rambling, I feel like, in some ways than others, but whatever. Like I said originally, if somebody wants to listen, great. And if they don't, we're amusing ourselves. This is Amy with Creative Catapult Coaching.
And Megan with Focus Like a Mother.
Are we focused? I'm not sure we are.
Today, I'm not sure we were, but we're working on it.
We're working on it. And this is the Control Alt Think podcast, and maybe we need that actual reboot today. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.